All right, for the second time, I want to introduce you to our talk, the Hut Group's journey to growing sales and profits with Performance Max. And before we dive into the topic, I want to introduce myself real quick. My name is Clemens, and I'm a senior client lead for Smarter eCommerce since more than 10 years, meaning I'm responsible for the end-to-end implementation of our systems and solutions for our client. And in the role of the client today, my partner in crime, Rob.
Thanks, Clemens. Hi, everyone. My name is Rob Davis. I'm the Acquisition Marketing Director at THG Beauty. My role is effectively to understand trends and strategic direction that we take across our retailers in the group. And I'm here to talk with Clemens today about the journey that we've gone through with smec over the last 12 months.
Perfect. What have we planned for you today? First of all, we want to set the scene a little bit, talk a little bit about our respective companies, and also about this new campaign type, Performance Max, that is so heavily featured today. After that, Rob will tell you a little bit about the challenges and how it all started, the cooperation of Smarter eCommerce and the Hut Group. And then I'm going to talk about how all these challenges that we faced, how we turned them into wins with our solution. Of course, there's also the very important topic, does this thing actually work? And we have brought with us some results and insights from one of our tests that we have done together, and also a very specific use case when it comes to optimizing logistics. And after that, we're going to do a short wrap-up, and that should bring us to the end of the talk. All right. First of all, about Smarter eCommerce. Even though we are doing this talk in English, we are actually based in Austria. The headquarters is in Linz, and we also have offices in Vienna and in London. We are in business since more than 16 years, and as you can see, our client list heavily features very big retailers that have one thing in common, very large catalogs, so a lot of items to sell. For example, Reichelt Electronic, Schaefer Shop, but also one of my personal favorites beside the Hut Group, the Miami Heat basketball team from the States. And as you can see up there in the top right corner is also the Hut Group, and Rob will shortly introduce his company.
Yep. I'm the reason that we're doing this talk in English. Apologies. I come across from the UK. I work at the Hut Group, as I mentioned. It is headquartered in Manchester, but we're a global operation. We run a series of online pure play e-commerce retail companies, and my focus and my division is the Hut Group Beauty. But it's a multi-divisional group with nutrition. You might have heard of MyProtein. And we also run Ingenuity, which is our platform from an end-to-end e-commerce enterprise solution point of view. So yeah, nice to meet you all.
Thank you. There's this elephant in the room that we are going to discuss today, and this is called Performance Max. And I just want to tell you on a really high level what this is all about. And the Google API documentation describes it as a unified buying service to all Google Ads inventory. And as you can see down here, this one campaign where you should put all your budget into and one common return on ad spend goal will serve YouTube, Gmail, the Google app, the search engine result page, and also the discovery app. And of course, this is Google's approach is give us all your catalog, give us your assets, lean back and enjoy the ride. But of course, there's a lot more to it. Also, it poses one unique challenge that more than 80% of retailers currently are already using this campaign type or automated bidding as itself. And there's the real simple rule that when everybody is doing the same, it's difficult to stand out. So what do you do when everybody is using the same campaign types, the same assets, etc.? How do you make sure that you make the most out of your catalog?
So what I'm going to do is give you a kind of brief overview and set the scene around looking back 22, 23, what our challenges were as a business. And I'll go through a few different aspects to this, which hopefully give you all a bit of an insight into where we were in terms of our needs and the challenges that we were facing. So if I look at this in terms of like the 5 key areas, we've got taking back control. So as Clemens mentioned, PMax is a little bit of a black box in a sense. So you have a campaign that does everything, and it will expose and surface your ads to multiple different inventory sources across the Google ecosystem. So having some sort of control over that was quite a challenge for us. We found that ultimately Google would make decisions on our behalf to expose and place our ads into different areas across, like I said, the Google ecosystem. So video, display, PMax, search, etc. And so in order for us to get a little bit more control, we were trying to understand how we can manipulate and leverage the PMax campaign structures in order to make sure that we could have a little bit more granular control over SKUs and categories and markets, etc. Then when we look at the scalability of kind of looking at multiple brands and multiple markets, THG has hundreds of accounts across dozens of markets, across dozens of brands. And so the scalability here was really important for us in terms of how do we get PMax working not just in one small market, but with a relatively small team globally across hundreds of accounts. So that's something that we were also trying to figure out a solution for. And then if I look at the efficiency versus scale kind of conflict of interest, this is where, yes, PMax can give you quite good scalability. It's quite quick to implement. It's a simple campaign type to set up. And in theory, you can scale your accounts very easily. Now, the downside to that is, as I mentioned, the lack of control, giving slight challenges to efficiency. So how do you control the KPIs that you really care about, and how do you deliver either the cost to revenue efficiencies in the right way so that your global performance as a retailer or as a business is satisfied? So moving on to then, like, how do we implement those key metrics? Like I mentioned, we've got different KPIs that we measure personally as a business, and I'm sure most retailers would be caring about things like gross revenue, order value, and basket value, etc., which do feed into the Google algorithm through your Google conversion tagging or any floodlight tagging that you might have in place. But what we really also wanted to understand is how can we influence metrics that we care about outside of those relatively straightforward metrics that Google's using to optimize. So things like gross margin, or operational costs, or fulfillment costs, or new customer acquisition costs and rates, etc. How do we feed those into the PMax algorithm so that it can optimize effectively to those business metrics that we also care about on top of things like revenue and cost efficiencies? And then the final challenge really is that once we'd rolled out PMax and we kind of migrated everything from smart shopping into Performance Max campaigns, we were also pretty clear that the algorithm is effectively strategically blind. So it doesn't know which SKUs you care about as a business outside of the metrics that it can see. So if we had, for example, a seasonal event, or we wanted to ensure that a particular brand or a particular line or a particular category got additional exposure, we were finding it hard to find the levers and the buttons to push and pull in order to give those products and categories and SKUs, etc., the right exposure both ways. So either we pull or push in different areas. So that kind of blindness that PMax has, we were also trying to understand how do we find a solution that gives us a little bit more control. And again, it kind of all goes back to how can you manipulate the system in a way that benefits the business and profitability overall. So that's always something that we're on the hunt for.
Perfect. So, and that's when we started to talk to each other on how we can turn these challenges that Rob just laid out into wins for our client. And basically our system is built in a way that we are able to face these challenges. As you can see, we have here 3 of those challenges: take back control, how to implement key metrics, and efficiency versus scale. And how do we tackle this? We use a system, or our system uses an approach that is basically doing product segmentation. This is a typical picture that you see in a normal Performance Max campaign, or when you create one Performance Max campaign, as it's the best practice by Google. You have the black products that strongly contribute to your goal. So they have a real good ROAS, high order values, etc. The yellow ones that they contribute to your goal, so they are not top sellers, but they also don't hurt your business. And then we have the blue ones. that do not contribute to your goals at all. So they basically only cost you money. They don't bring you enough revenue. The efficiency is not there. Damn it. And what we try to do is using different data sources, first, second, and third-party data, to really start segmenting all those products into how they can contribute to your business. We have the push campaign, the push products that we want to really be very aggressive on, high budgets, and then of course we also have the products, like I said, that only cost you money, and we really want to deprioritize them. We use all the data that we can get our hands on. It's of course very easy to put the data from Microsoft Ads or Google Ads into the system, and also from the Merchant Center, but everybody could do that. And we are also taking the business data from our clients. So as Rob laid out, we are really looking into margins, return rates, etc., and really try to then segment all the products based on this data. And then it gets really interesting, because what do we do with this data? To tackle the challenges that PMax is strategically blind, so it does not care which items it sells, or the efficiency versus scale, we use a predictive AI system. And basically what it comes down to is that in your catalog there's a long tail problem. 80 to 90% of your items simply don't get enough traffic to be clustered in a way that makes sense. Here's a typical picture that about 60 to 70% of your cost and your conversion value comes from about 3% of your inventory. On the other hand, of course, 71% of your products never have a conversion, and they simply cost you money. I guess that's also something that you see in the HUT group on a regular level.
And I think most e-commerce shopping campaigns will experience the same thing whenever things grouped into one campaign. So with all things being equal in the auction, the same bid for a whole swathe of different products across your inventory, especially if you've got dozens of thousands, like a lot of retailers use, or have, sorry. What we found is that the exposure, like Clemens, you mentioned, gets kind of consolidated on the top products. So you'll only be servicing products that have historically got good performance data, that Google believes is going to generate the best click-through rates and the best performance overall. But that, like you said, leads to this issue where you've got all the long tail across your inventory, barely getting any exposure. And I think for many retailers out there, including us, that was a challenge, because we were trying to get an improvement to the overall breadth of exposure across the inventory. And that's something that is quite important for, I guess, many retailers, because you'll be stocking multiple brands in some cases, or multiple categories. And if you are seeing Google only surface a certain set of products or categories for very generic keyword searches, which in most cases is the majority of the search query volume, then you've got a little bit of a problem trying to get your inventory out there and obviously in front of people. So we saw a very similar kind of situation for THG. Yeah.
So this is basically one of those long tail items that you might find in a Google Ads account. Giorgio Armani perfume that has basically no performance data at all. There's no conversions, there's one click, there's €2.40 of cost. Google will perceive this item simply not important to your business. So they probably will not show it in any auctions. Then, of course, if you take all the other data that we talked about before into consideration, like all this business data that Rob mentioned, seasonalities, return rates, margins, but also our product neighborhood model, where you have different perfumes from Giorgio Armani. You have other perfumes in the same bottle size, same price range. Then you can really start to get a grasp on how could this item actually perform. And then you might come to the situation that this is basically not a low potential product, but a high potential product that you want to push. And this is done for every single item in the catalog of our clients. Like Rob mentioned, it's tens and hundreds of thousands. And each item, as there could be no data on it, will get scored via high, mid, low. And then we have this campaign structure of a high a high goal contribution or a low goal contribution, and those campaigns will then get pushed or deprioritized accordingly.
Yeah, and actually just on that, sorry. So like when you look at the campaign segmentation, this is something that you're taking all of your SKUs, you're layering them into different priority groups so that you can bid either more aggressively or less aggressively on that grouping. And what we found within some of the different markets across our global accounts is that depending on the size of those markets, you can go even further, right? So we've got 3 here in kind of the most basic view, where for some of our smaller markets, potentially in Southeast Asia or in the Middle East, where we have exposure, but we don't have huge budgets behind them, let's say, the 3 tier made a lot of sense. But for some of our core markets across Europe, the UK, and America, the scale of the accounts is a lot larger, and so what we decided to do, and you can, I think the beauty of it is that you can split out depending on whatever you want, it's category or lines or brands, whatever it might be that you as a retailer want to segment by. We took the categories then, and so we'd have a high, medium and low for all of our hair care products, for example, or we'd have a high, medium, low for all of our skincare products. And that gave us, again, a little bit more control over seasonal changes and shifts in customer demand. So you might see skincare, for example, right? Sun cream is massive at the moment when the sun's shining, which is lovely. So we're able to leverage all of our skincare products separately away from other categories. And I think that's where the hierarchy of your campaign structure is very flexible when it comes to the tiering.
Good point. And of course, there's one big advantage to this whole system as well. It's fully automated, so it really gives Rob's team back the control and also the time to invest it in strategic decisions. You don't have to wake up every day and shift some SKUs around from one campaign to the other, or set a new campaign up, change some assets, or whatever it is that you do with a Performance Max campaign. And of course, this also enables you to scale this thing globally with maybe only 50% of a team. And this is done via daily round trips where every single data point that we get into our system, a performance change or a goal change even. So Rob might come to me and tell me that he wants to increase his spend by 20% because he needs 15% more revenue. We put this into the system, there's the round trip going, and all the products will get scored accordingly and then also pushed accordingly. We also have the updated budget and T-ROAS goals. Our system also gives daily recommendations on how to set your budgets, on how to set your goals in order to reach this global optimum. So not one single category is important, but it's basically what comes out at the end. And in the end, this leads then to a perfect alignment of all your campaigns with close to zero manual effort. Rob, I think that's also something that you have seen on your teams, that they are...
Yeah, I think it covers the whole scalability challenge that we were looking at. So when we, like I mentioned, trying to scale this across, scale the idea of segmenting and scaling the idea of being able to leverage and push and pull across different categories and SKUs at will. The actual structural management of that is quite a big resource investment from a team setup perspective. And so when we look at our multiple digital marketing teams across the group, one thing that I think this did solve for us was having that automated so that the team can take that time back and focus a little bit more on strategic priorities, innovation, testing, and experimentation, right, in order to be able to drive new ideas and get more innovation, rather than spending a lot of the time day to day just kind of tweaking things and moving SKUs between campaigns manually. So yeah, I think you're right. Being able to get that time back meant that we can focus a lot more on the strategy rather than operations, right? I think that's something that's definitely been valuable for the team.
Yeah. So, and now that we know how this thing works in theory, we of course also wanted to put this to the test and see if it actually works for the HUD group. And to really prove our approach, we have decided to run a geographical split test. We do this in accordance with our data science team, where we basically split a certain market, in this case, because it's so good for the visualization, Germany. It's a number of states are the control geo. So this is managed with the old setup, and we have the treatment geo here in yellow, where we then use our approach and try to check if we are able to provide an uplift. And for the HUD group, we decided on Japan. Rob, why Japan?
So, I mean, at the HUD group, we generally take a very robust approach to testing any new technologies or any new features or strategies that we might be implementing across the board. So for us, it was really important that we did a clear-cut A/B test using the geo-split experiment methodology that Clemens just described. Now, like I mentioned, we work globally across pretty much all markets. And so in order to de-risk any testing that we do, we normally choose markets for these kind of things where we can get enough data, so it's a statistically significant test, but also not too large that it could potentially put the business performance at risk. And so we identified for the HUD group Japan as being a kind of a good market that fit these requirements. And yes, so working with smec, looking at splitting out by city, and using correlation analysis to ensure that they were equally spread so that the A/B test was looking back at historical data and could be confident that any changes moving forward once implementing the treatment was the only variable that was changing, right? So any impact to performance, we could then correlate directly back to any, the implementation of the smec system within the Performance Max campaigns. So that was, I guess, the reasons behind the choice of market. But we also then went forwards and tested more markets with more geo experiments across our, larger and more, more risky, effectively markets, and building confidence as we went. So that's something that, it took a few months for us to get through. But during the course of 2023, Q2 and Q3, we were really able to get pretty much the whole globe implemented in time for peak, which during Q4, and I can imagine for most retailers, it's a key area where you don't want to be making major changes. And so we had pretty much everything in place by October, which meant that we could take advantage of all of the benefits that came with this during the most important period of time. So yeah.
And that all resulted based on this one test that we did, and in these 3 months that we ran the test, we were able to increase the traffic by 41%, more clicks, but also, of course, for a retailer, even more important, the revenue went up by almost 70%. So it was a very successful test. And as I mentioned before, this long tail problem, we also did some analysis on how we were able to tackle this. And as you can see here, we have here the control, which is basically the old setup, and we have the treatment, which is our setup. And you can see here in the total revenue that we were able to increase the revenue by 1 bar. And there's also this very nice effect that even though health and beauty remained the strongest category, we were able to increase the revenue here for health and beauty, but we were able to decrease the share of the revenue. So the revenue is now spread more evenly across the whole catalog, which of course has huge benefits, because why have a catalog of 200,000 products when only health and beauty converts?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the point's really clear here. It's more about that challenge that we had of the long tail not getting much exposure. Like I mentioned, if you only see the majority of your clicks and impression volume going to a very small set of, or a niche, area of your inventory, then you're limiting yourself on the long tail. So this is clear example of how we were able to increase the revenue mix and the click volume mix across a broader range of categories, which again, when it comes to our overall strategic goals of potentially pushing particular categories at certain times of years due to seasonality or events or sales, for example, that meant that we had a little bit more, a little more ability to get the exposure there. Yeah.
Perfect. So this was it when it comes to our tests and our proof of concept that this thing works. And then in the longer run of our cooperation, of course, we did not only switch all the markets to our campaign orchestration approach, but we also did some use cases. And we just want to lay out one specific one where we were able to optimize logistics. Rob, please remind me, why is logistics so important?
So like I mentioned at the beginning, there's metrics outside of the revenue and the cost and the orders and the conversion rate and CPCs, etc., that Google uses to optimize. We wanted to layer in some business metrics that we felt were important. So the use case here was where in MENA, in the UAE, we operate 2 separate warehouses. One's local and one's in the UK. And we found that we understand that we have clear different fulfillment costs between the 2 warehouses to the UAE. And so in order for us to ingest that information into the algorithm, we were able to upload the business data into the smec's kind of signal algorithm in order for the SKUs to be split out and given either a boost for those which were local and therefore fulfillment costs were lower, or potentially pull back on those which were being shipped in from the UK, where our fulfillment costs were a lot higher. So from a kind of a profitability perspective, it meant that we had a little bit more control over the distribution of those SKUs, and where we were getting more exposure was on the localized inventory, right? So that the consumers were getting more access, I guess, to where the delivery was quicker, delivery was cheaper, and we also saw, obviously, an impact in our profitability as a business. So that's kind of where we wanted to implement this particular kind of logistical layer into the way that the bidding signals were given, the tiering of that account particularly.
Yeah. And what's, of course, here of importance is that should we not give PMax this information, we have to, it will simply go hard. And I think we have to hurry a little bit. Okay. Yeah, so we had a 19% increase in daily revenue using this approach. So for the wrap up, I'm going to be real quick. Be strategic when it comes to your good performance max approach. Really think about what's your global optimum goal and really set up your campaign structure to really reach this goal. And of course, in that case, it makes sense to use a customized solution. As Rob said, we have big markets, we have smaller markets. Doesn't make sense to use one approach for all of them. And as I already said, it should really support your global optimum. And
yeah, and I mean, like we've kind of been making the message throughout the talk, and I think this is just general advice as well, right? For in terms of anything that you do, try and automate as much as possible to generate as much scalability, reduce pressure on your internal resource, and then testing. So whatever we do, and I'm sure whatever you guys would want to do in the future, make sure that you test it robustly, make sure that you use the right A/B methods when it comes to the evaluation of testing, so that you can be confident that the impact is correlated to any change that you make. I think that's something that I've learned over the years, is that it's quite often that you get multiple variables impacting things. So looking at before after is not always the best way. Try and do testing in parallel across anything that you do.
yeah, and any further questions, we are at booth 13 right over there. If Björn is listening, he can lift his arm. Yeah, perfect. That's where we are. Thank you.
Thanks very much.